The 1960s in the United States of America were a contradictory time. On one hand, the economy of the world's superpower was flourishing, with the growth rate of the gross product reaching an unprecedented 4 to 6% each year. Democratic presidents John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson proclaimed the advent of a society of general well-being. On the other hand, economic prosperity for many Americans raised the bar of expectations for what their country should be. 2 prosperous decades after World War II. In the United States of America, a generation of baby boomers grew up. This term referred to the generation that grew up in the prosperity of youth, educated and critically minded towards established orders. Most of the baby boomers held left-wing views, up to Maoism and gay liberation. They protested against the Cold War with the Soviet Union, racial segregation, income inequality, gender inequality, and mandatory military service. The last issue became particularly acute for the youth with the onset of the Vietnam War. The dislike for the government, customary orders, and values among American youth was fueled by the mysterious assassination of President John Kennedy in 1963. The court found the eccentric lone gunman Lee Harvey Oswald guilty, which many Americans considered a lie. Therefore, the prevailing trends among American youth in the 1960s were nonconformism, a desire for rapid, decisive changes, and hope for a new political force that would establish real justice for all. It was among teenagers growing up in such an atmosphere that California teacher Ron Jones conducted his experiment. Jones was a young and progressive educator, unafraid to teach children about history in unconventional ways. In April of 1970, Ron Jones turned 26. He graduated from Stanford University and worked as a history teacher in the Californian town of Palo Alto at Cubberley High School. Considered progressive, with a modern approach to teaching. Jones himself held left democratic views and considered himself a follower of the psychologist-humanist Carl Rogers, one of the founders of humanistic psychiatry. Students respected the young and progressive Jones. He was never afraid of innovation, brought extremely controversial guests to the class, a communist or a member of the Ku Klux Klan, and they themselves told the students about their ideologies. He had charisma. He really knew how to engage in his lessons. Kids without Jones as their teacher envied us. "We were proud to be taught by such a teacher," said one of his students. On Monday, April 3, 1967, Jones conducted classes for high school seniors, dedicated to Nazi Germany and World War II. The second year of high school is an educational level in the American tradition, roughly equivalent to 10th grade in Russia. Several students wondered how the Germans could have submitted to an obviously inhumane dictatorship and ignored the mass extermination of people. Instead of a direct answer, Jones proposed the audience to participate in a weekly experiment, not revealing its essence directly, but promising a higher score to all participants. For those unwilling to join, the teacher allowed to study independently in the library, but not for grades above passing. As Jones later admitted, he did not have a clear and sequential action plan. The experimenters started with something simple. He introduced discipline in the class with a uniform, strict sitting posture at the desk, and other rules. Now the students were required to answer the teacher only while standing in a concise manner and always addressing him, "Mr. Jones." To reinforce this, Jones several times made the teenager leave the class and re-enter with the correct posture. He calculated that the students would start to resent and sabotage his team. Most of the boys submitted with clear enthusiasm, invigorated by the lectures about the benefits of discipline in any activity from science to sports and military affairs. To Jones's surprise, the measures he thought were absurd and foolish only drew the student into the educational process. Even those who used to quietly sit in the back now responded on par with the good students. I started to rethink my views on pedagogy, as I preferred free discussion in class and maximum independence in learning. But now I've introduced authoritarian methods, and the class liked them. They had an immediate effect. The teacher was surprised at how much the teenagers liked discipline, collectivism, and the power of a charismatic leader over themselves. The next day, Tuesday, April 4th, Jones dedicated to instilling the new value of collectivism in teenagers. As on the first day, he launched into a lengthy discussion that no group of people will achieve success if its members do not feel like a single whole, putting the common above the individual. The audience enthusiastically accepted this thesis. Then Jones had the students chant the motto, "Strength through order, strength through community," in chorus. He named his group the Third Wave and introduced a special greeting for it, reminiscent of the Nazi salute. The leader continued to adorn the group with new attributes, and this only made it more popular among the students. On the third day of the experiment, the original 30 members of the Wave were joined by 30 new participants. Jones led a fixed membership in the movement and called on students to get involved in the third wave of new activists. By the end of the experiment, the group consisted of no less than 20 people, from loners and outsiders to school leaders, nerds, and athletes. Jones tried to find each wave participant their own thing, from the development of official symbolism to the registration and accounting of new comrades. By the fourth day, students from our course, other courses, and neighboring schools had joined us, skipping their classes. I had no idea it would go this far. Developing the experiment, the leader obliged a few boys to monitor internal discipline and report its violators. The speech was about unsanctioned gatherings of participants, non-compliance with the official greeting, or preemptive statements addressed to the third wave itself. To Jones's unpleasant surprise, not only officials but also voluntary informers reported to him about real and imaginary offenses of his comrades. Another revelation for the teacher was that one of the class outsiders, a certain Robert, aspired to become his bodyguard. Proud of his new status, the teenager accompanied the teacher everywhere, even to the staff room where students were not allowed. The experiment became unpleasant for the creator, but he understood that he could not stop it due to his own desire. It was too late to back out. Now I can understand why the astronomer so stubbornly looks through his telescope again and again. I delved deeper and deeper into the study of my own perceptions and motives that drive group and individual actions. The majority of teenagers openly supported Jones. Only 2 girls opposed him. Before wrapping up the initiative, Jones brought the experiment to a climax. On Thursday, April 6th, at the next gathering of his adepts, he developed something like an ideology for the third wave. The teacher proclaimed that the power of movement is not only discipline, collectivism, and joint action, but also pride. And the participants of the wave should be proud that they belong to one of the cells of the emerging third party, an alternative to the Democrats and Republicans. Day by day, it will officially form and overthrow the old elites, paving the way for the young. On Friday, April 7th, the leader of the third wave will conclude. The national leader of their movement will appear on television, the future presidential candidate in the elections. Jones declared that a new order will come to replace the worn-out individualism and democracy, built on strict discipline. The wave will change the fate of the American people, giving them a new sense of order and unity. The audience eagerly welcomed this inflammatory rhetoric. Jones's words were given weight by being read by one of the students. In the Fresh newspaper, there's an advertisement with the slogan, "The third wave is coming." With the teacher's silent agreement, the teenagers decided that this was a secret message, testifying to the strength of their movement. The leader again reinforced his words with action. He named several participants who were reported by comrades and ordered the security service to bring the dissident to the library. Jones explained that they were excluded from the third wave for disloyalty. The students obediently followed the principal's order, unanimously acknowledging his authority. The participants of the experiment later admitted that they essentially gave all the points to Jones. The teacher himself wrote that only 3 friends who were close to each other openly rejected his ideas, without naming them. They noticeably lagged behind in their knowledge and grades from the rest of the class, but with the start of the third wave, their talents became unnecessary to anyone. Hancock later named 2 of them, Ellis Hess and Sherry Tusley. Both tried to reconcile the culmination Friday meeting with the general viewing of the leader's performance. But the girls' attempts were unsuccessful, as the majority of the class unequivocally supported Jones and the rules he introduced. In a week, Jones's experiment took on a life of its own, going beyond the boundaries set by its creator. Rumors about the third wave reached not only the parents of the students, but also other educators. Jones had to explain himself to the fathers of 2 students at least twice. In the first case, it was Ravi. In the second, a military pilot who was a German prisoner of war during World War II. Both times, the wave leader managed to explain that it was only about studying history, not creating a new party with authoritarian tendencies. To avoid unpleasant consequences, and for the purity of the scientific experiment, Jones deliberately distanced himself from racist and chauvinistic rhetoric. Jones's colleagues didn't have any complaints at all. The school principal, once meeting him in the school corridor, greeted him with a wave of the hand and a smile. On Friday, the short story of the movement ended. Jones gathered a few dozen group participants in the action hall and turned on the TV, but for several minutes only white noise came from the screen. Then the projector turned on a chronicle of the Third Reich, with frames of military actions, concentration camps, and the work of the Nuremberg trials to the thoughtful school children. The teacher explained to the seniors that now they have understood on their own example how the dictatorship of politics works, instilling in people faith in their absolute rightness, the only justice, only their ideas free followers from critical thinking. There is no wind, there is no such thing as a national youth movement. The third wave does not exist. You were used, manipulated with you. Your own ambitions were fueled, and you ended up here. You are no better or worse than the Nazis we studied. Years later, students remembered that some of their peers took the news with a smile. They said, "We knew all this wasn't real." Most, however, did not hide their disappointment. Some, like Guard Robert, cried. Jones hit one of the hidden nerves of the history of the Third Reich. In the 1930s in Germany, most teachers welcomed the rise to power of Adolf Hitler. In the year 1935, about 4% of the members of the Nazi Party were school teachers, and among the salaried workers in the National Sozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, they made up the majority of about 25%. Schools became one of the foundations of the dictatorship. Under the Nazis, they cultivated informers for any dissent, even down to harmless jokes. Any individuality among the students was suppressed. They were made to engage in military training at the expense of the educational program. In the year 1935, at the party Congress in Nuremberg, Hitler himself declared that the German boy of the future should be as swift as a greyhound, as tough as leather, and as hard as Krupp's steel. In a decade, the Nazis will produce a new type of man, disciplined, firm, and healthy to the marrow of his bones. The teaching of many subjects took on an ideological character. In history lessons, children were taught that Germany is the greatest historical state in Europe and the world. In biology, they were reminded of the natural hostility of Jews to Koreans. And in geography, that the borders of the German state should coincide with the area of the German people. It's interesting that the risky experiment didn't affect Jones's career. But in 1977, the Caberly School did not renew his contract for other reasons. They said it was the teacher's political views and social activism. He openly criticized the war in Vietnam and supported the Black Panthers, a radical organization that advocated armed struggle against U.S. authorities. Jones became a practicing psychologist, then found himself in publicity and creating theatrical scenarios. At the end of the 1970s, he wrote a small essay about the third wave. The author of the experiment did not remember it for a long time, even destroyed a small photo archive of the failed movement. The third wave became the basis for several theatrical productions and films. After all, the story in which a simple teacher easily creates an authoritarian ideological cell among several hundred people on an equal footing is truly shocking. What do you think about this experiment? Write in the comments and rate this episode, for fairness, so that we understand that we tried not in vain. See you on our channel.